of the suspect than anyone in this case right now.
It's very painful to know that anyone would think that either of us had anything to do with this abduction of our children. But me and my wife know the truth.
Susan Smith. What you have just watched was a clip from a real interview of David and Susan Smith, where they sat together presenting a united front of grieving parents. In this moment, Susan tearfully claimed to police and the public that a black man had carjacked her vehicle at a red light, driving off with her two young sons, Michael, age 3, and Alexander, age 14 months, still strapped in their car seats. Her desperate pleas for help sparked immediate concern, leading authorities and residents alike into a frantic search for the missing children. Her husband, David Smith, said it was painful that people would even think either of them had a hand in the abduction. Before the tragedy, Susan Smith appeared to be a regular young woman and a loving mother to her two boys. However, her life was not as perfect as it seemed. She was dealing with a failed marriage, depression, and a painful affair with a wealthy man who had just broken up with her because he didn't want children. This rejection became the final push that led her down a dark path. On the night of October 25, 1994, Susan drove her car to a boat ramp at John D. Long Lake. With her sons strapped into their seats in the back, she got out of the car, put it in neutral, and watched as it slowly rolled into the dark water. The car, with her children trapped inside, sank out of sight. For 9 days, she acted the part of a distraught mother, making tearful public pleas and inventing a story about a carjacker to cover up her monstrous act. The entire nation was consumed by the case, feeling the raw emotions of what they believed to be a mother's worst nightmare. The initial investigation focused on finding the supposed kidnapper. However, police quickly found holes in Susan's story. She failed a polygraph test, and her account of the event changed several times. The relentless media coverage kept the case in the national spotlight. The public, who had originally felt sympathy for Susan, began to grow suspicious. On November 3, 1994, confronted by investigators, Susan finally confessed to the murders. The truth was a shocking blow, not just to the public, but to her husband, David, who had believed her lies for over a week. The trial took place in 1995 and became a huge national event. The prosecution argued that Susan's motive was selfish and deliberate. She wanted to get rid of her children to win back her lover. Her defense team, however, argued that she was mentally unstable and a victim of severe depression and abuse. This created a split in public opinion. Some saw her as a monster, while others saw her as a deeply troubled person who had a mental breakdown. David Smith testified, his grief and anger at her betrayal clear to everyone in the courtroom. After a short deliberation, the jury found Susan Smith guilty of 2 counts of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison. Though the prosecution pushed for the death penalty, the jury did not agree. As of 2025, Susan Smith remains in prison. She was denied parole in November 2024, partly due to David Smith's emotional plea to the parole board to keep her locked up. She will be eligible for parole again in 2026. The Susan Smith case had a profound impact on society. It shattered the idea of the perfect mother and forced a difficult conversation about mental illness and the horrific act of a parent killing their own child. The case also raised questions about the power of media and public perception, as Susan's initial victim status was completely reversed when the truth came out. Case 2, Michelle Blair, Detroit, Michigan, March 24, 2015. Court officers arrived at a rundown apartment on the east side of the city to serve an eviction notice on Michelle Blair, a tenant who had fallen behind on rent. What they found inside was anything but routine. Behind faded curtains and cluttered furniture, in an old white freezer, lay one of the most disturbing secrets in American true crime. When the officers opened the freezer, they were met with the frozen, contorted bodies of 2 children, wrapped in plastic and stacked on top of each other. Their faces, locked in expressions of terror, had been preserved for years. Michelle Blair, 35, a mother of 4, lived in the apartment with 2 surviving children. To neighbors, she seemed strict but ordinary. She was sometimes seen yelling at her children in public, but nothing about her behavior suggested something sinister. What no one realized was that her 2 children, 9-year-old Stephen Gage Berry and 13-year-old Stoney Ann Blair, had been missing for years. They had not been seen at school nor at doctor's appointments. They had simply vanished, and no one noticed. When detectives questioned Blair, there was no denial. She confessed almost immediately. What she described was even more horrifying than the discovery itself. Blair claimed that Stephen and Stoney had abused her youngest child, though this claim was never fully substantiated. Instead of seeking help, she took it upon herself to punish them in the most cruel and sadistic ways. Blair admitted that Stephen's final months in 2012 were filled with relentless torture. She beat him with extension cords until his skin split, poured scalding water over him, suffocated him with plastic bags, and forced him to drink household cleaners like Windex. Finally, when she had grown tired of the torment, she strangled him with her bare hands. She then stuffed his body into the freezer. 9 months later, in May 2013, Blair turned her rage on her daughter Stoney, accusing her of similar abuse. The torture followed the same pattern: beatings, starvation, suffocation, and finally smothering her with a plastic bag. Stoney's body was then placed above Stephen's in the freezer. For the next 2 years, Michelle Blair lived in that apartment with her 2 surviving daughters. They went about their daily lives, eating breakfast, watching TV, and doing homework, while their siblings' frozen bodies remained just a few feet away in the freezer. Blair warned her daughters never to open the freezer, and to them it became a forbidden and ghostly presence. The discovery of the bodies shocked the world, and Michelle Blair was quickly dubbed the Freezer Mom. The case wasn't just about murder. It highlighted years of sadistic torture, a crime that unfolded unnoticed by the systems meant to protect children. In court, Blair became infamous for her outbursts. She showed no remorse, screaming at prosecutors, cursing the fathers of her children, and spitting at reporters. She declared that she would kill again if she ever discovered more abuse. One of her infamous courtroom quotes went viral: "I feel no remorse for the death of those demons." The trial was brief, with no doubt about Blair's guilt. She confessed, and her surviving daughters testified about the abuse they endured. In June 2015, Blair was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of torture. The judge called her actions the ultimate betrayal of motherhood. Even after sentencing, Blair has never shown regret. She still justifies her actions, claiming she was protecting her youngest child. But the sheer cruelty of her methods reveals a much darker truth. Today, Michelle Blair remains incarcerated at the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Michigan. She spends her days in isolation, despised by fellow inmates, remembered only as the Freezer Mom. Case 3, Shelley Knotek. In the quiet town of Raymond, Washington, the Notek family appeared to be an ordinary, friendly family. Michelle "Shelley" Knotek, her husband David, and their children lived in a modest farmhouse surrounded by trees. To outsiders, they seemed like any other family in the small town. However, beneath the surface, Shelley harbored a dark, sadistic side that would eventually unravel the lives of those around her. Born in 1954, Shelley learned from an early age how to manipulate people, creating elaborate lies about illnesses or abuse to gain sympathy. As she grew older, she mastered the art of psychological control. Instead of using physical violence, she relied on humiliation, guilt, and emotional terror to control others. When she became a mother, her role was not one of care and nurturing, but of destruction. Shelley's 3 daughters, Nikki, Sammy, and Tori, grew up in a home filled with constant fear and abuse. Shelley subjected them to physical beatings, forced them to strip, and humiliated them in cruel ways, such as making them wear oversized diapers as punishment. She starved them and even forced them to eat their own vomit. Shelley alternated between moments of affection and intense cruelty, convincing her daughters that she was their only source of love. Shelley's cruelty didn't stop with her children. She had a habit of taking in vulnerable individuals who were in need of a place to stay, but these people became her next victims. One such individual was Kathy Lorino, a hairdresser and family friend who moved in with the Noteks in the early 1990s. What seemed like a safe refuge quickly turned into a nightmare. Shelley starved Kathy, forced her to do endless chores, and beat her until she was frail and weak. In 1994, Kathy died as a result of the abuse, but Shelley and David did not report her death. Instead, David, a Vietnam veteran, later admitted to burning Kathy's body at Shelley's command. Another victim was Shelley's nephew, Shane Watson. When Shane witnessed the abuse and began documenting it, Shelley ordered him killed. In 1995, Shane was shot in the head and his body was disposed of in the same way. Another victim was Shelley's youngest daughter, Tori, broke the silence. She reached out to relatives, revealing the horrors of her home. Police launched an investigation, leading to the arrest of Shelley and David. The truth of years of abuse, torture, and murder came to light. Shelley was sentenced to 22 years in prison, while David received 15 years. In 2022, Shelley was released from prison, having served 18 years. Her story was immortalized in the best-selling book If You Tell by Greg Olson, exposing her sadistic behavior and manipulation. Shelley's case serves as a haunting reminder that evil can hide behind a mask of kindness, even within the confines of a family. Case 4. Waneta Hoyt. In rural New York during the 1960s and 70s, infant deaths were often attributed to crib death, a term now recognized as sudden infant death syndrome. At the time, medical science offered few answers, and families were left to grieve without closure. For Waneta Hoyt, however, SIDS was not an unexplained mystery. It was a cover for something much darker. Waneta was responsible for the deaths of 5 of her own children. Born in 1946 in upstate New York, Waneta grew up in a modest, poor family. At 20, she married Tim Hoyt, and by 21, they had their first child. Eric. To outsiders, their life appeared to be the picture of the American dream. Young, married, with a new baby. But behind closed doors, tragedy began to strike. In January 1965, when Eric was just 3 months old, he died suddenly, and doctors attributed it to crib death. This tragic loss was only the beginning. Just a few months later, their second child, Julie, was born. Before she reached 3 months old, she too passed away under similar circumstances. Once again, the cause was labeled as crib death, and the community offered sympathy. But the questions soon began to arise. How could one family lose 2 children in such a short period? The birth of their third child, James, in 1966 brought little comfort. James, like the others, died at 3 months old, and the cause was again ruled as crib death. By now, whispers were circulating in the community, but medical science of the time had no answers. Waneta and Tim were told they were simply unlucky, and no one suspected foul play. Waneta's fourth child, Molly, was born in 1968. She too died at 3 months old, and her death was once more attributed to crib death. Then came Noah in 1970. He too died within 3 months, making it 5 children in total who died under mysterious circumstances. Yet each death was ruled natural, and Waneta continued to live her life as a grieving mother. In the early 1990s, new research on SIDS showed that the likelihood of one family losing multiple children to the syndrome was incredibly low. In 1994, a district attorney reopened the case. Investigators began to suspect foul play, and after hours of questioning, Waneta finally confessed. She admitted to smothering each of her babies with household items, such as blankets and pillows, explaining that their crying overwhelmed her. In 1995, she was convicted of 5 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 75 years to life in prison. However, she never served her full sentence. In 1998, she died of cancer just 4 years into her sentence. Her case left a lasting impact on both the medical and legal communities. It prompted a reevaluation of SIDS diagnoses and led to a closer look at infant deaths that had been dismissed as crib death. Waneta Hoyt's story serves as a chilling reminder of how evil can be mistaken for a tragedy and how long it can take for the truth to emerge. Today, her case is taught in both medical and criminal justice programs as a warning about the dangers of complacency and the importance of questioning accepted explanations. Case 5. Michelle Kehoe. Evil doesn't always present itself as expected. Sometimes it wears a smile, bakes cookies, and sits in the front pew at church. This was the shocking truth behind Michelle Kehoe's story that sent shockwaves through Iowa. She wasn't the stereotypical villain. She was a mother, a neighbor, and a familiar face in the community. But beneath that calm suburban image, she was plotting one of the most unimaginable betrayals, the murder of her own children. Michelle lived in Coralville, Iowa, with her husband Eugene and their 2 sons, Sean, age 7, and Seth, just 2. To outsiders, they were a typical family, churchgoers, active in community events, and residents of a quiet neighborhood. But behind closed doors, Michelle's life was falling apart. Her marriage was strained, finances were collapsing, and she battled depression. Though she appeared exhausted to her friends, no one suspected the danger that lurked beneath. On November 9, 2008, Michelle told her husband she was taking the boys on a short trip. She packed them into the family van and drove them to a remote location near Littleton, Iowa, a secluded area surrounded by gravel roads, trees, and farmland. It was a place where no one would hear screams. Once there, Michelle executed her horrific plan. She told her sons they were going to play a game. She taped their eyes shut and bound their hands with duct tape. To Sean, it was confusing. To little Seth, it must have been terrifying. But they trusted their mother, unaware that she held a knife. Michelle first attacked Seth, slashing his throat and nearly decapitating him. His body went limp almost instantly. Then she turned on Sean, stabbing him repeatedly in the head, neck, and chest. Sean fought for his life, struggling against the tape and gasping for air as blood soaked his shirt. But he refused to die. He tore the tape from his eyes and broke free, stumbling onto the road. Michelle chased him, still holding the knife, stabbing him as he ran. Finally, Sean collapsed, covered in blood. A passing motorist saw him and stopped to help. Sean, barely conscious, managed to whisper, "My mom did this." Back at the scene, Michelle tried to stage the attack. She tied her own hands, inflicted shallow cuts on her body, and claimed a stranger had attacked them. But her story quickly unraveled. The duct tape had her fingerprints, and the knife matched the wounds. Most damning of all, Sean's testimony exposed the truth. At the trial in 2009, Sean, now 8, took the stand. He described how his mother tied him up, stabbed him, and killed Seth. His testimony was powerful enough to convict Michelle. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole and currently serves her sentence at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women. Michelle's name has faded from public view, but Sean, the boy who testified against his own mother, carries the painful legacy of that tragic day.
Case 6. Brenda Andrew, the only woman on death row in Oklahoma, was convicted for the 2001 murder of her husband, Rob Andrew. Born in 1963, Brenda was raised in a strict religious household and appeared to embody the ideal suburban life. She married her high school sweetheart, Rob, and they had 2 children. They attended church, volunteered, and maintained the image of a wholesome, middle-class family. However, beneath the surface, Brenda craved excitement, money, and attention. By the late 1990s, her marriage was falling apart. Rob, a steady advertising executive, was the provider, while Brenda sought something more. She found it in an affair with James Pavitt, a former insurance salesman. Together, they plotted to kill Rob for his life insurance policy, which was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. In November 2001, Brenda invited Rob to their Oklahoma City home, claiming it was for a routine handoff. Instead, he walked into an ambush. Rob was shot twice with a shotgun, once in the arm and once in the torso. He collapsed in the garage and bled out while Brenda watched as James finished the job. The chilling part of the crime was that Brenda's children were inside the house during the murder, forced to listen to the gunshots and the death of their father. Brenda then told the children their father was dead and quickly fabricated a story about masked intruders attacking Rob. But investigators uncovered the affair, the financial motive, and the insurance policy that linked Brenda and James to the crime. They had carefully planned every detail, including disabling security systems and preparing escape routes.
After the murder, Brenda fled the country with her children, evading capture for months while law enforcement pursued her. She was eventually arrested in Mexico in 2002 and extradited back to the U.S. for trial. The case became a media sensation, with prosecutors portraying Brenda as a manipulative woman who used her sexuality to manipulate men, only to turn to murder for financial gain. In 2004, Brenda was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to death. Her accomplice, James Pavitt, also received the death penalty. Brenda's case is one of sheer selfishness, driven by greed and control. She sacrificed her children's well-being and their father's life for an insurance payout. Brenda maintains her innocence, but the evidence paints a different picture. She continues to appeal her conviction while serving her sentence at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center.
Case 7. Marybeth Tinning. In the small town of Schenectady, New York, Marybeth Tinning's life was marked by an overwhelming string of tragic events. Neighbors whispered about her misfortune as one by one her children died under mysterious circumstances. Between 1972 and 1985, Marybeth buried 9 children, each death initially explained away as a tragic accident or illness. The community rallied around her, offering sympathy, but little did they know the woman they mourned for was hiding a far darker truth. Born in 1942, Marybeth had a troubled childhood, marked by an abusive father and feelings of being unwanted. In 1965, she married Joe Tinning, and the couple moved to Schenectady, where they had a large family. But for Marybeth, motherhood became a platform for manipulation and control rather than love. Her first child, Jennifer, died suddenly in 1972, shortly after birth. Doctors attributed her death to meningitis, and the town mourned with her. Less than a year later, her son, Joseph, just 5 months old, died of SIDS. Then her daughter Barbara passed away in the same way, sparking growing concern among friends and family. The deaths did not stop. Over the next decade, child after child died under Marybeth's care. Timothy died in 1975, Nathan in 1978, and she even adopted a baby boy named Michael in 1979, only for him to die a year later. By 1980, suspicions began to arise. Doctors started to quietly discuss the possibility of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, or even murder. But without conclusive evidence, they kept their concerns private. In 1981, Marybeth's daughter, Mary Frances, passed away at the age of 4. A year later, her son Jonathan died at 4 months old. Her final child, Tammy Lynn, was born in 1985 and died within months of being born, also suffocated in her crib. After Tammy Lynn's death, investigators began to piece together the grim pattern of Marybeth's life. In 1986, following the death of Tammy Lynn, Marybeth confessed to smothering 3 of her children, Timothy, Nathan, and Tammy Lynn. She explained that she had grown frustrated with them and no longer wanted them in her life. Marybeth was convicted of second-degree murder for Tammy Lynn's death in 1987 and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Despite being denied parole multiple times, she was granted release in 2018 after serving 31 years.
At the age of 75, Marybeth Tinning was freed from Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, returning to the same town where she had buried her 9 children. Her release caused public outrage, as many believed she should never have been allowed to re-enter society. Marybeth's story remains one of the most chilling examples of maternal evil.
Case 8. Keli Lane led a double life, fooling everyone around her, from friends to family and even the public. Her case has become one of Australia's most infamous, marked by hidden pregnancies, a missing child, and a woman who managed to conceal 2 completely different lives. Born in 1975 in Sydney, Keli appeared to have it all. She was a tall, athletic blonde with dreams of competing in water polo at the Olympic level. By the 1990s, she was excelling in the sport, competing nationally, studying to become a teacher, and socializing in Sydney's vibrant social scene. But beneath this polished exterior, Keli was hiding a dark secret. Between 1992 and 1999, she became pregnant at least 5 times, but no one close to her knew. Her parents, boyfriends, and teammates remained unaware of her pregnancies, which she carefully concealed through clothing, intense training, and lies about weight fluctuations. Each time she gave birth, she erased all traces. 2 of the children were legally adopted, while 1 was raised by her parents, believing he was a relative's child. But one child, Tegan, born in 1996, simply vanished. Hospital records show Keli gave birth to Tegan on September 12, 1996 at Oran Hospital in Sydney. 2 days later, she checked out of the hospital with the baby in her arms, but Tegan was never seen again. Keli carried on as if nothing had happened, attending a wedding the same day and returning to her regular routine. There was no paperwork, no adoption files, no relatives caring for the baby, nothing to suggest Tegan had ever existed. For years, Keli's secret remained hidden. However, by the late 1990s, adoption authorities began investigating her repeated pregnancies and the missing child. A deeper probe uncovered the chilling truth. Tegan had disappeared, and no trace of her had been found. Keli's stories about the baby varied. At one point, she claimed she had given Tegan to the biological father, Andrew Morris, but he denied it. At other times, she suggested the baby had been informally adopted or hidden. The inconsistencies led detectives to believe that Keli had murdered her baby to preserve her lifestyle. The trial, which began in 2010, saw the prosecution argue that Keli killed Tegan to protect her dreams of becoming an Olympic athlete and maintaining her image. Despite the lack of a body, Keli was convicted of murder, sentenced to 18 years in prison with a non-parole period of 13 years. Keli Lane's name is forever linked to betrayal, not just of her daughter, but of everyone who believed in her. Despite maintaining her innocence, the mystery of Tegan's disappearance endures, with Keli's trial and conviction continuing to divide public opinion. Case 9. Theresa Riggi's case is one of the most disturbing in recent Scottish history. Born in California in 1965, she later moved to Scotland. In 2010, during a bitter custody dispute with her estranged husband, Pasquale Riggi, Theresa brutally murdered their 3 children, twin boys Austin and Luke, and their younger daughter Cecilia. The children, aged 8 and 5, were stabbed multiple times in their home in Edinburgh.
Teresa then triggered a gas explosion, attempting to cover up her crimes before jumping from a second-floor balcony in a suicide attempt, which left her severely injured. The police arrived at the scene on August 4, 2010, after reports of a gas leak and explosion. Inside, they discovered the children's bodies, each with multiple stab wounds. The twins had been stabbed at least 8 times each, and Cecilia suffered the same brutal fate. Evidence showed the children had tried to defend themselves. Teresa, found with serious injuries from her fall, survived and was later arrested. The scene left even veteran detectives shaken. During the trial, it was revealed that Teresa had been suffering from narcissistic and borderline personality disorders. Psychiatrists testified that she couldn't cope with the collapse of her marriage and the thought of losing control over her children. She was convinced that if she couldn't keep them, no one would. Initially, Teresa pleaded not guilty, but later changed her plea to guilty to culpable homicide, citing diminished responsibility. She was sentenced to 16 years in prison, a decision that outraged many, who felt she should have been given a life sentence. However, she never served her full sentence. In 2014, just 3 years into her term at Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottinghamshire, Teresa was found dead in her cell. She had taken her own life. The case remains one of the most infamous family murders in Scotland, raising questions about the impact of parental control and custody battles on mental health. While the tragedy didn't make significant headlines in the US, it continues to haunt those familiar with the details of the case. Theresa Riggi's name is now tied to one of the most chilling instances of maternal murder in modern history, showing that evil can exist behind closed doors where control is lost.
Case 10. Darlie Routier. What kind of heartless person could stand at a grave and joke about children who were killed just days earlier? Rolette, Texas, June 6, 1996. At 2:30 a.m., a 911 call comes in. "You walked in here and did it," says the frantic voice on the line. It's 26-year-old Darlie Routier. Her voice trembles with terror as she repeatedly screams, "They killed my babies." Officers rush to the Routier residence, a quiet 2-story brick home in a Dallas suburb. Inside, they find a horrifying scene. 6-year-old Devin is on the floor, stabbed multiple times and lifeless. Nearby, 5-year-old Damon struggles for breath, bleeding from several knife wounds. He dies minutes later before paramedics can save him. The living room is drenched in blood. On the couch, the carpet, the walls. Darlie is covered in cuts, bruises, and a wound on her throat. She tells officers a chilling story. An intruder broke into her home, attacked her and her children, and fled through the garage. What should have been a straightforward case of home invasion turns into something darker as investigators find inconsistencies. The Routier family appeared to be perfect. Darlie was young, blonde, and glamorous, a cheerleader mom. Her husband, Darren, was a businessman providing a picture-perfect suburban life. But beneath the surface, their financial situation was dire. Darren's business was struggling, and the couple was under significant financial pressure. Darlie confided to friends about feeling overwhelmed by motherhood, even resenting the responsibilities. As police examined the crime scene, they found the garage window screen had been cut but showed no signs of disturbance, no dust or cobwebs, and no forced entry. Nothing in the house had been stolen.
A kitchen knife found in the sink was traced to microscopic fiberglass particles matching the material from the window screen. It became clear that the scene had been staged. Forensics also raised doubts about Darlie's injuries. Her throat was slashed, but the cut was just shy of her carotid artery, a wound someone could have inflicted on themselves without risking death. The case took a notorious turn when, just 8 days after burying her children, Darlie was filmed at the cemetery on what would have been Devon's 7th birthday. Surrounded by family, she sang happy birthday, laughed, and sprayed silly string over the grave. To prosecutors, this was damning evidence of her lack of grief and cold indifference. The defense argued the footage was taken out of context, with Darlie earlier seen grieving at the gravesite. They claimed the silly string was her way of honoring her son with joy, the way he would have wanted. The trial, which began in 1997, captivated the nation. Prosecutors painted Darlie as a resentful woman who snapped under pressure, killing her sons in a moment of frustration. The defense argued there was no motive and that Darlie loved her sons. Despite this, the jury convicted her of capital murder for Damon's death, and she was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Darlie has spent more than 25 years on death row, continuing to assert her innocence and claiming an intruder was responsible. Her case remains one of the most debated in true crime, with supporters advocating for new DNA testing, while critics argue that no credible intruder has ever been identified. The case continues to divide public opinion. These were some of the most shocking cases of mothers who committed unthinkable crimes. In my view, they deserved every bit of the punishment they received. May the souls of those innocent children rest in peace. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.